like to also thank firstly Dr. Madhulika for inviting me here. I thank Mr. Kalimuthu, the Chennai Circle, for organizing this workshop, and there are many eminent scholars here today. Dr. Amarnath, Madam is also here, Dr. Amiteshwar and Dr. Joglekar. So many people are there in the audience and wonderful participants. So I'm really happy to be here. And today, what I thought was there is a lot of information on stone artifacts available. There are many lectures, many books, courses. But here, me and Shutanuka from our institute thought that we will focus on stone artifacts specifically in the context of the NMMA program. And I'd also like to acknowledge Dr. Akhilesh. He could not be here, he is out of station, but he has kindly shared all his videos, and parts of the presentation are also prepared by him. So what do we see? We have, whenever sir has come, in any documentation, all of you have come across stone tools? Yes or no? All of you? Yes or no? All of you have come, and you will sometimes get very frustrated. Okay? So when we are dealing with stone tools, there are some points which we need to keep in mind as far as NMMA is concerned. This is not going to be a talk about generally about stone artifacts and human evolution or whatever. It's going to be specific for this particular workshop. So when you have stone artifacts, and we have brought some here and you have also got, there are multiple perspectives like you see over here. One is the study of stone artifacts for purely research goals. Now I am not bothered about that right now. And the other is specifically for heritage management, which is what NMMA is all about. That is databases. And you were having wonderful talk by Professor Joglekar which showed you exactly where this database creation can take us to very, very new levels, which will open up new dimensions. And I think you have some talks also on database creation in the afternoon. So all this is what we are now going to discuss. And there's a little bit of interactivity as well. Now, you all know why stone tools are so important. I don't need to go through this entire list, but basically it is a way by looking at how we became us, how we became human. What are major questions in the evolution of our behavior. Now, when we come specifically to the NMMA point in documentation, I just form. These forms are available, anyone can just fill in. And you see that on these forms, you have a number of categories to be filled in. And you all have this copy with you, so I won't bother. This is just an example of one which we have done. And it goes into great details about the provenance, measurement, material, description, etc., which has been covered in the beginning. But the first question is, firstly identifying artifacts. Sometimes this is very easy, sometimes, especially if they are made on particular types of raw material like quartz, it can be quite difficult for people who are not used to dealing with lots and lots of tools. The second is a very important point which was raised in the morning also, and I think yesterday. What is an antiquity? Amongst these hundreds of stone tools that we get from excavations and sites, we get all this. Now, which one are you going to classify? Which ones are you going to choose? And in the whole NMMA history, there have been changing definitions of which exactly should be selected to classify. And I have had a lot of discussion and debate on because what is important from our perspective as a research scholar is perhaps not important in terms of a national database. So, am I going to look at only those artifacts like hand axes, cleavers, or those which have retouched? What happens in the case of microliths? What happens in the case of blades? What happens in the case of codes? For me, these are very, very important. But for purposes of national database, some consensus must be reached at some point in time as to what we consider very important. Okay, and what we are going to classify and what perhaps we are not spending that much importance on. So this is a question which I feel still has not been fully resolved. But for now, let's just take it, put it very simply that we are going to look at tools which have some evidence of retouch or some evidence of shaping or façonnage on them. Okay? So let's take that for now for granted. So, but actually this is a major point which when we are studying large assemblages and then trying to decide what to choose, these are things that we need to take consider. Second is which attributes to be selected. Now you have in your form very important points already given of measurements and weight. And then you have a category of description and identification marks. So when you consider stone tools, and we have brought them in, we'll pass this around as well, you have on your own tables, which attributes are you going to select to describe it? Now if you are a trained prehistorian, the attributes you are going to write and choose are obviously going to be very different from those who are just looking at it when you are doing pottery and you are doing 100 other things. So which ones are you going to choose? In this case, I agree fully with what Dr. Joglekar has said and others, Dr. Jha has also mentioned. And the online form which you are filling up has to be very carefully structured. If you have a paper form, there is a chance, just like Dr. Joglekar said, of either having a lot of maybe unnecessary data, or like Madhulika said, data which is too little, or a lot of complexities can arise there. But if you have a very carefully designed online form, that picks up that the moment I type of object and I select stone tool, that takes me to a subset form which has a set of categories which are relevant for stone tools and perhaps not relevant for coins or not relevant for anything else. This will simplify matters for people who are actually at the receiving end. I know because we have done a lot of NMME forms, and I have faced this problem when trying to decide what do I feel important and what actually is required by the organization, and what maybe a research scholar I am appointing to do the work for me, what they may consider to be important. So this is something we need to factor in. The next is the cultural phase. Now this is a major issue. In India, traditionally we have this. So you have a lower Paleolithic, no doubt. In lower Paleolithic we have an Acheulean. Do we have something older than the Acheulean? There are some claims. As this is a southern Indian circle, we are not really worried about that too much. But definitely in northwest India, there are claims of something which is even older. So we need to factor in. Then you have the middle, upper, Mesolithic and so forth. So what points am I going to cover here with Shutumuka? We look at some issues. One is context, cultural phase, terminologies and technology, typology and state of preservation. Basically, I am just going by this form. Okay? Now, through time, there have been many different research aims when looking at prehistoric sites or artifacts, right from Robert Goosefoot onwards, and much of these, the technology, typology, cultural phase is dependent entirely upon this theoretical framework. Just like Dr. Joglekar said about changing views towards statistics in the archaeological community in India, similarly you have different approaches towards stone artifacts. And when we are thinking about a national database, we should not also forget this past. Okay? So context. Now you have here provenance. Now when you are studying collections from excavated sites, this is not a very difficult issue. You have the lat long, whatever it may be. But when you are studying collections which are made, say, by amateurs, and this is largely from surface sites, then you have a major issue. Many of the museum collections will have a very rough provenance, say Madras region, especially those abroad. They may give one site name, but it's not necessarily from that site alone. I know because from Atrambakam, from 19th century people are collecting. They are also collecting from neighboring sites, giving them the same name, or just calling them Madras industries or something like that. So there are no data on the stratigraphic layer, there is no data on anything else. So we have to be extra cautious when we are putting down this provenance, especially museum collections, and in that case maybe this data online form could have maybe 1 or 2 levels in which we are absolutely sure of the provenance and where the provenance is very hazy. So some word which is commonly used. So like Choglekar correctly said, the standardization is key for databases. If I write handbags with capital H and handbags with small h, the database ultimately will pick up 2 artifacts. Okay? So this we have to be very cautious. So there may be something to think about when we are talking about provenance so that it's easy. The whole point in a national database of this magnitude is that it should be simple. Simple for anyone to get the first level of information to the government. Second level, you can have expert committees. Okay, I am good in, sir is expert on coins, expert on fauna, whatever it may be, temple architecture, inscriptions, whatever. At the second level, you can have the same forms going to the experts who will add maybe another level of information, which is then simplifying what all of you are going to enter, and you don't worry too much. Next level, somebody else can bother about. So, in context, in India, you have all these different types of contexts. So, sometimes you may be collecting the data yourself when you are doing science. So, in that case, you should factor in very, very meticulous understanding of the sedimentary and ecological context from where you are picking up that tool. If you are studying an already existing collection, then you should try to go back to the articles or the IAR, it's okay, or the IAR where they have given some more information about the site which you are going to document. Okay, for example, if you have some collections in the ASI circle, say from some of the older sites which were documented long time back, there is always some sort of information about the context, and this you should try to follow up on. Okay, never mind. I can just
disconnect it.
I can just talk about it.
No. That's not a big deal. Oh, connect it. No, connect it.
Okay, so anyway, you can see the pictures later, but I feel that this provenance, which Madam correctly pointed out in the morning, this provenance of where you are getting something ultimately becomes a key in any database when you are trying to when you are trying to later on build patterns, or like he said, do statistics or something like that. And very often we take this very lightly. Okay, so when you are documenting, pay a little bit of attention to this issue as well. As far as, say, for example, we are here in Tamil Nadu. As far as Tamil Nadu is concerned, we have a whole range of sedimentary contexts or geological contexts for different types of sites. And if you don't know it, it doesn't matter. But do try to go back to the articles which people may possibly have discussed this and add that into the form. Alright? So, for example, you have fluvio-lacustrine contexts here, or when you come to Middle Paleolithic, you have another type of clay silts or sands, or when you have Jwalapuram, like Ravi sir mentioned yesterday, you have tools above and below Toba ash levels, or within cave sediments of a particular nature, or within or near these fairy red sand dunes, whatever the case may be. Or when you come to the Neolithic, or so-called early agro-pastoral communities, because I'll come to this question of terminology little later, you have completely different shift in areas occupied and shift in the type of sediments or landscapes where you find these artifacts. So even though what you see when you are categorizing is only this. Okay, you have got some museum collection, you are given a job, you are told you see only this in isolation. And you should not try to look at whatever you get in NMMA as an isolated find. You have always to put it in the context which requires little bit of research and thinking before you finish the form. Okay? Now, or you might get self-manufacturing sites. So in prehistory also there is a diversity of the evidence which is available for you across the entire region. So a shift in the cultural phase, a shift in the geographic, geomorphological context of what you are finding. Next, again, when you look at what you see with you, you have either sometimes you are collecting it yourself, in which case you should make an effort, if it's just a surface survey, to be as meticulous as possible before you pick up that fellow from the ground and put it on your form. Or if you are just documenting sites, like Ravi mentioned yesterday, you are documenting sites, you should be very careful about plotting it very carefully, like you see we are doing here in the excavation, and then getting that exact geo-coordinates onto the form. The second thing which we have to be careful is looking at tools in the form of an assemblage. Now, okay, if I show you this, what cultural phase will you assign to it? Simple. You can pass it down or just here. Just this is coming to your table and your boss has told you, please add a cultural phase. What will you give? You have lower, middle, upper, meso, whatever is traditionally taught. What will you call this? What will you put down on your form?
Try.
Try, very simple. Nothing more than what you have already learned. Just this tool. These are actually, I have not brought the originals because I was scared of bringing, but this is an experimental tool, never mind, same thing, made by Dr. Akhilesh. What cultural phase would you assign this to?
Okay, so we have a middle, we have lower and middle from this table.
Okay.
We have middle. Okay, we have this one from middle, so two different answers. We have upper from here and
that table? Sorry, I'm keeping you from lunch.
No.
What about this? Each table give one answer or multiple, it doesn't matter.
But see, there is a trick also inside.
okay, so
She already gave you the clue also.
lower and this is Ashulya.
Okay,
Yeah, okay.
fine.
Uh,
And this table? You have the box which you have already given them to do.
But there is a trick she has already discussed.
Okay, this is really good. You have these two examples also now.
okay, and last two
Last
is lower and
Okay.
this is upper.
Okay, fine. So you have all come out with something different. Oh, same tool, something different. Now we will give you the answer. Both of them are lower Paleolithic, Acheulean and axis. Now you will look at this, you will say, okay, that's the same. This is also lower Paleolithic. What about this? This one and that one with Shuto's hands. Look at this. Now what would you call? Lower Paleolithic?
And this one?
And that one? Lower? All agree lower? Are we all on same page?
Yeah?
Yeah?
Neolithic.
Neolithic. This is an unfinished hand axe. I mean an unfinished celt or an axe. Okay? So, and this is also, this is a hand axe. Now you are not wrong. In what you have said, you are not wrong for the simple reason that tool types often are time transgressive. You have hand axes in the Acheulean, you have also got some continuing into the middle. You have blades actually starting in the middle and continuing onwards through time. You have roughouts of cells or Neolithic axes which sometimes can be mistaken so much to be Acheulean hand axes that sites have been called Lower Paleolithic. In some of the Neolithic cell manufacturing sites have actually been termed Lower Paleolithic.
But there is another trick inside your question also, which will be dealt by archaeological officers at the level of assistant superintending archaeologist. Which one is actually an antiquity?
Yes,
Because
exactly.
one was prepared by Achilles, and
Yes.
another was.
Yeah, no, assume that this is
No,
real.
but this is a practical one.
This is all real.
This is a practical thing we are facing every day. Is this an antiquity or this is not? So
No, this is an antiquity.
No, but
and
this one is.
Yes.
That one is not.
That is not, but that we just brought for example purposes.
This is like
Yeah,
exactly
that is an
replicated
antiquity.
from-
Yeah. So now the question also arises that when you are looking at an individual artifact, you must think of the context of the assemblage. What do I mean by that? Things occur always with other things. So based on a single artifact, sometimes it's extremely difficult to identify the cultural phase. For example, you will call this a blade, all agree? Yes? What you will say, Upper Paleolithic, something like that you will put down. What about this? You will call this also blade? But this is coming from manufacture of a hand axe. It is a biface thinning flake. So these are things that when you are documenting, if you have a doubt, it's perfectly alright to say unclear or blade-like or some terminology must be devised till an expert comes and verifies and checks what is going on there. The second thing by which you can solve this problem is pretty easy by looking at the assemblage. So what is an assemblage? An assemblage is everything which you get at a particular site. And if you have an individual artifact, it's like a lost baby. So once you put it in the assemblage, you get the whole family structure, and then you are able to build better understanding of the context, the cultural phase, and everything else related. I admit this is very difficult with museum collections, where there is not much information, but every museum collection, at least in India, has some report somewhere in IAR or Ancient India or other archaeology journals, Man and Environment, Puratattva, somewhere there will be some information in the early journals. Even 19th century accounts always have information about what's going on at the site. So it's not really that difficult to solve this problem. Okay? Cultural phases, as Ravi said yesterday, this is the terms we use now. Earlier I had said Upper Paleolithic, Mesolithic. But with recent discoveries of microlithic artifacts going way back in time, some of us prefer to just group it as a late Paleolithic. Simplify matters. If you don't have a date, sometimes from the microlithic artifact which is found, we don't really know. If in some sites, if the stratigraphy is very clear, yes, no problem. In other sites, sometimes we prefer that term late Paleolithic. Anyway, these are not really questions for you. These are questions which must be addressed at a theoretical level in the design of the form itself. Okay? Plus, across India, now we are in southern zone, there is a great deal of regional, spatial and temporal variability. What I find in northern Tamil Nadu, I am not going to find the same thing in the south. What I find is the date for Neolithic sites in, say, Tamil Nadu is not the same as something I am getting in Andhra. This leads to the question of the classification of some types, and I'll go back a bit here and show you this. Now you have this celt, wherever you find a celt, automatically we are trained by default of our long-standing theoretical orientation to call it Neolithic. Without thinking, we just put down Neolithic. But is it, what is the Neolithic? What is the date? Is it very recent? Because these celts are time transgressive and are even found worshipped, as you all know, in villages today. You can see in the bottom, it's a long-term continuity of these tool types. So there also, even though you might write stone celt, cultural phase Neolithic, at the back end of this entire database, the persons who are handling the database must realize that okay, there is no chronology available. There may be this ambiguity as to exact phase for these tool types. Okay? So from your point of view, you can write stone cell, then you can write brackets, maybe inverted comma, depends on the drop down list which is available for you, or you can make sure in some comment that no chronology is available for this, so this is my tentative assessment until further studies are done. Okay, is this much fairly clear? Now, obviously all these tools you have to keep in the back of your mind human evolution. I'm not going to give you a lecture on human evolution today, but you should know that what little bit about what you are analyzing. For example, if you are doing temples, we all know about Pallava, Pandya, we know the cultural background to that documentation of built heritage. But when you come back to prehistoric period, spare a little time in thinking about the people who have actually made these tools and now vanished. You don't need to enter on form anywhere who make the tools. It is not required. But it's always good to look at the context of what you are studying. This will help you yourself. Okay? Now we have already done this activity and you can have a look at what you have in those boxes which you have there. You do this yourself. Assign a cultural phase. How would you define these artifacts? Have they done this yesterday?
They've done.
Okay, then each table just tell me what you have, how you have selected it, you have classified what you have classified. We'll spend 2 minutes before we move on. Just take 1 minute, look at what's on your table and tell us how you have filled up that form. They did this yesterday.
They not only prehistoric tools, they did coins and other.
Okay, so just I'm asking you, just look at the prehistoric tool. Okay, sir.
That's what I was saying, that often without context,
Yes.
it is difficult to say that it is an artifact or not. Artifact, antiquity or
Absolutely.
not. Artifact of course,
Yeah.
antiquity or not.
Exactly, exactly. So what are we defining as antiquities? This is really an important aspect of this whole NMLE.
Like when you are having unpolished core or unpolished Neolithic cell,
Yes.
it's pretty difficult to place it in the cultural context.
Absolutely. So these are things which the second level of analysis
And
by an expert team can help this through.
Expert team will be also, I think, baffled with something so well finished like what Akhilesh has done.
No, that is very easy to identify which is experimental, which is archaeological.
With
It's
photograph
easy.
only.
No, that is quite easy to identify
Which
actually.
photograph?
If the photo is good, you can easily make out because the artifact will lack certain characteristics which I'll come to.
Yeah, because
Yeah, I'll come to that. That's fine.
the things that you have used.
Yes, yes. So we can figure that out pretty easily and it can be done.
That's why
All done?
that's why we require expert person.
Yes, yes, you are absolutely right. So, okay, what has that table got?
Okay, so you can answer.
Since you may near a big cell,
Okay.
the reason for me to identify is since you Paleolithic, only the material I say is that
Exactly. This sir has raised a very important point which we are coming to is the raw material. So you have that also there in your description column. Based on that, you can take the analysis to a slightly higher level. Okay, time up. We have to go for lunch also, so time up.
Oh,
They are finished.
no, there is one more for here.
Yes.
And, sir, you can answer. Yeah. Just, they think it's a hammerstone.
Okay, okay. That's what we say. This table? One person come up and just say what you did yesterday. yesterday. You don't need to measure and all, just tell me what phase and what is the time. You have done the measurements yesterday, no?
Okay. So they think it's a scraper.
Okay, which one? And that's it. This team? Okay, so you have some idea and you have had some discussion already on what you are going to call it. Right? Everybody? You have all come out with something. What are you calling yours? And which cultural phase?
We think it's independent.
Okay, now she has an important point. She's getting a small hand axe, quite diminutive, and she's saying it's middle. Now that will go down into your database as middle. Now there's nothing wrong in that, but we don't know. So we have to look at the next set of clues. Maybe the artifact number is written on that, from which site it has come. Then you should go back, do a little bit more research and try to narrow down your analysis. Okay? Then that will make the life of the NMMA authorities much easier in terms of verification. They will know exactly you have referred to, say, 4-5 articles, you have referred to IAR, and you are coming up with this identification based on some logic in your mind. Okay? It's not that you have to write a whole thesis, but you should take a little care before you identify that. Okay. Shall I move on? Right. Nowadays, sometimes you have seen I have used a terminology late Paleolithic. Here I am going by your traditional Indian nomenclature of lower, middle, upper Paleolithic and Mesolithic. You can use either one right now. The aim right now, as I see it from what Dr. Madhulika has said, is to compile as fast as possible a database. For that, some amount of flexibility and simplification is very much required. So I'm not going to go too much about terminologies. You have people who use this terminology of mode 1, 2, 3, etc. as well. Don't bother too much about all that. Just stick to some simple terminologies which will help to get the data into the database. After that, before statistical analysis can be conducted, a lot of work is required to rectify, remedy, verify and upgrade. Okay? So, now you have all this data and you are putting it inside this massive database. As far as the database is concerned, as was discussed in the morning, there are certain issues in the access to the website, and there are also issues in the overlap of certain criteria and cultural phases which at present are available. Madhulika has already pointed this out to you, that you have some overlap. You have a Paleolithic and you have a lower Paleolithic. So there may be some problem for you to click the correct phase, but that's a minor issue, and that can be actually rectified pretty easily with whoever is handling the database management to make life easy for the people who are entering the data. Also, there are various ways in which the database can be structured so that you cannot enter more than a certain number of words, or you cannot enter less than certain, or you have to enter only numeric data, or you have to enter only chronological data. So these are all minor issues and these can be sorted out in my view pretty easily. Okay? Now, when you are looking at anything on your table and trying to, again we are sticking with this cultural phase and terminology topic, you have to know what's the background in India. So even if you are not a prehistorian, little bit of information to know that don't classify any core or any flake which you find as being old one or mode 1, because at present it's a very big question in India. So we know that many students, may just find a code, any code. Yeah. Look at a code and a flake and then say, okay, this is old one. There are examples of people doing this. So these problems, you should know a little bit about the background to avoid. There are some sites in northwest India, so when the northern workshop is held for the NMMA, this issue will surely come up there as to what is classified as Acheulean and what is classified as pre-Acheulean. As far as your Acheulean is concerned, I don't think anyone has a major problem. There is an issue with the hand axes and cleavers because these continue into the middle. So that ambiguity will be there, although the expert who is ultimately verifying your tools, once they know the site and the context and the layer or the technology by which that tool is made, will be able to help you out with that problem. Okay? So you have this diversity of bifaces, and we have already a very good idea of Acheulean sites in India. So there is no problem in you trying to follow up with published literature. Middle Paleolithic is more ambiguous. Why I am saying that? Now you found a scraper. Which cultural period are you going to put it in? If you find a single scraper, where are you going to put it? Scrapers are time transgressive. They start from the Acheulean, continue through time. Chopping tools, time transgressive, right up to the Mesolithic. Some of the cells, time transgressive. So, when you find a scraper, to be on the safe side, just maybe you should have an option Paleolithic. Not that scrapers don't occur in later periods, they do. So, this is an issue which the design of the form must consider, the question of some cases having ambiguity. Okay? But in the middle, you have Levallois. Now, if you have Levallois flakes, which you are finding, something like what she is showing, and if you have some Levallois cores in the assemblage, then you can think about, yes, this is more or less middle.
Comes up with this, so that is how it can
Yeah, you just put it together.
Yeah.
Then put it
Okay.
there. Oh.
Yeah, okay. So this you will never get. Very rarely you will get it, but if you do, you should consider. Again, if you have typical blades and microliths, all of you are aware of that. But sometimes your microliths are not necessarily Mesolithic. Sometimes your microliths, as known from sites in Jwalapuram, Jinu is here, he worked on that site, and you have Ravi sir was there yesterday, they go back to 30,000-40,000 years old. So if you find a small tiny blade, it's not necessarily Mesolithic. You have to consider again the context of the entire assemblage before you fill in the form. Okay? So that's pretty straightforward to do. In some surface case surveys, in the case of museum collections where people never recorded where they are picking up things, this is a big issue. And at the most we can write that this context is unclear or cultural phase is prehistoric but unclear. To be more specific, it's okay. We know that, okay, it's a prehistoric thing. And that's enough. For a national database at this level, that is enough in my view. So that at least we know what is coming in, and then you can refine it later. Okay? And of course, these cells which are going through time right up till today, where they are worshipped. Okay? Now move from field to lab. When you are moving from field to lab, you have cores, you have hammerstones, you have the tools which you identify as a tool, and you have waste products, which is an antiquity. In my view, I would like all to be antiquities. Obviously, the person filling up the form will be very happy because they'll make more money. So you have 10,000 flakes and you get counted per form. But no, for a national database, you have to make some tough decisions. And in those tough decisions, you have to think, what am I going to actually classify right now? And what can I classify, say, in phase 2 of the national mission? Or I can say flakes, n is equal to 100 and forget the measurements. Maybe I have a category size between 2 to 5 centimeters, 5 to 10, 10 to 15. I have a drop-down box, I just select. Makes it very easy for the person entering. But anyway, as the NMMA stands right now, you don't have to worry about cores, you don't have to worry about flakes. Okay, you are just worrying about the final tool. Now, again in this picture, which are the artifacts? Which ones? All? All, I'm not asking you cultural phase. Which are tools and which are not? This is also a fundamental issue, especially when you have microliths made on quartz. Because quartz shatters naturally also, and many people mistakenly call them as tools. And that's just natural shatter. So you should be careful. I've seen this in museum collections, whole lot of natural bits of things which are not artifacts at all. They are naturally fractured pieces. Even sometimes chert can look like a core if it fractures through thermal weathering or quartzite, through thermal fluctuations of temperature, sometimes it breaks up and you think it's a core, it's not. Okay? So anyway, in this image, everything is an artifact, but for NMMA purposes, it may not be so. Now, you come to the raw material. So I think you have...
They are artifacts, but not antiquities for us.
They are not antiquities for us, exactly. Now, in the description or somewhere, you have to write about raw material. So, firstly, why am I giving a little bit of information on identification of artifacts? Because that influences your measurement. We will come to that a little later. But basically, if I identify an artifact as a flake, okay, very simple. You have got tools on flakes. A flake has a bulb. She will show you what a flake looks like. And this basic, very, very simple identification of the blank, it is a flake, influences your measurement. Now, why is that important? Otherwise, Dr. Joglekar's statistics become all meaningless if you do not take the measurement correctly. Okay? If you do not measure these things properly, whether it's a flake or whether it's a hand axe or a core or whatever it may be, you will not be able to get continues right up to even some sites in microlithic sites used some of these techniques. So why am I showing you that? Is just when you are looking, it's perfect, it's a type of fracture and you will get percussion marks on both ends. So when you are looking at your artifacts, you have a look if you have some tools. Mostly the signs are gone with retouch, but never mind. This is just something for you to keep in mind. Then I will quickly show you some types of, just hold on 1 minute. I'll just open that video. So, you have very straightforward manufacture of the hand axe in which you have bifacial flaking. This is important. Why? When you are asked to, like Madhulika said, identification marks on the tool. So you can see here that he's just got a lump of rock, and then I will just quickly speed it through. He rotates that rock bifacially, the core or the flake, whatever he is using, he rotates it to detach flakes in a bifacial manner. Now when that happens, you have a number of flake scars which are generated. You can see here on all the flake scars, and some of these flake scars may end in abrupt step-like terminations like this. It just goes and then the force was not enough, so it just ended abruptly. So these sort of identification marks sometimes can be used as a descriptive indicator. Actually, it's not. There are many other aspects which you can consider, but you should understand this principle of flaking when you analyze this tool in terms of your NMMA form. I'm not talking about research at all now. I'm just talking about some hints for NMMA. Plus, in some of the cases, identification marks are obviously related to technology, but it can be related also sometimes to some breakage which can occur at a later period. So in this case, I would put this as very deep scars here, number of small, step terminations, plus the overall physical condition of the tool before I make a decision. The same thing when you are looking at factors such as Levallois, or when you are looking at other aspects of tool identification, you should know a little bit about how that particular tool is made before you describe it. So, for example, this is the last stage of a Levallois detachment. I will just pause it here, and she's brought the actual core there. So you have certain very diagnostic features on the core and on the flake. And if you look out for those features, you can immediately identify and write down in your form, this is not an ordinary flake, this is a flake coming from this particular technology. And this makes it much easier for the NMMA authorities later to be able to sort of classify or sort your forms into some sort of meaningful application. Similarly, some of the tools which are made, especially microlegs, do not come just from banging, from percussion. It comes from some type of pressure flaking. So the hammer is different, everything is different, and the identification marks on some of these pressure flaked blades or other retouch patterns is completely different. So that's another clue for you to look at. So that's why I'm showing you the video. You don't expect to do all about technology in this meeting. It's just that when you look at a stone tool, think about all these things at the back of your mind. How have they got the piece out? What are the diagnostic things I can see? If I don't know, no problem, I can go and ask someone. Okay, can you see any evidence of pressure flaking here? Can you see any evidence of leva loa? Can you see, is this a blade or is it just a long flake? So Shuto will show you there some sort of, so this is pressure flaking, completely different
Blades.
approach
Not
and
blades.
completely different way of looking at things. Okay? So sometimes in this blade manufacture also, you have certain criteria to look for. Any long flake is not a blade. This is the first thing. So Shuto will show you blades and she will show you a long flake. Any long flake is not a blade. Any small flake is not a microlith. Okay? There are many problems which I have seen when I was looking through the NMMA forms, in which anything which is elongated, you call it blade and you add upper paleolithic. So you must be cautious. The blade has particular characteristics which you can read up in any textbook and helps you identify that this is indeed coming from a way of manufacture that is blade technology. I'll just get that video out for you. I don't know where it's gone, but
The second last one.
this one. Yeah, this is the blade. This is a typical blade code which you can see, and this one. And when you are documenting the blades which arise from that video, you have to be again a little bit cautious in attributing what is a blade, what is a flake, what is just an elongated flake, and you have to be very cautious in attributing that in terms of the way of manufacture. For example, when he is trying to detach a blade from the very same core, you see there is a way in which he is doing it, a particular indirect percussion technological strategy that leaves behind signatures on the final piece. So if you understand a little bit about this technology, identification of the final piece is pretty easy. Okay? So not to make you too worried about all these things, but these, like Madhulika correctly said, is cautionary. Typology. What are you going to classify? Now this is a big theoretical issue. I cannot do it in 5 minutes over here. Just to give you a hint about the problems we face. And this is a real issue. In our office, it's not simple that we do scraper. So I've got this piece here. I've got this piece. You can see it's beautifully retouched. It's a scraper on a flake. Now, at the first level, all you need to do is to know whether it's an artifact or natural. Forget that. After that, the second level is a broad categorization, not merely trying to push this into some tight box. We are very fond of boxes. This is a European terminological hangover. So, we like to immediately give it a name, but it's not so simple in history. And don't forget, those people never classified their things as a convex-sided scraper or denticulated. They didn't care. They just had a very good working edge. They didn't call it a hand axe. They had some mental template, and the names are given by us. So debates on typology, even in the form, I will not be surprised, and it's not unexpected. If you call it a scraper, I call it a denticulate. Okay? Now this is an issue of big significance. Cannot be solved in NMMA. For your guidelines enough, you can write scraper / denticulate, it's good enough. I understand what you're trying to say. So at the second level, you look at the position of the tool in the reduction sequence, in its life cycle. So here we don't have any children in the audience, but we have people maybe young or in their early 20s to very old people like me. So you have different stages of a life cycle in this room. Like that, each tool, if I pull it out, I can place it in terms of where it's falling in its reduction sequence. So you have like that unfinished Neolithic axe, unfinished axe. It's midway, not finished. This fellow is finished and done with. But somebody could pick it up later and do something else with it. So I won't complicate your life. You go into another stage of analysis. In the last stage only I give it a name. Why I give it a name? So I can be on the same page as the whole world. I can't invent some new name here which is typically Indian and somebody in Africa or Europe will not know what I'm talking about. So the NMMA ultimately is a global, it's already a global platform. People are looking at NMMA, what is coming out of India. It's the most and the largest database system to my mind. I don't think anyone else in any region, maybe whole of Europe will have a database similar to this. So it's really, really important. Therefore, it becomes more important for us to be accurate about what we are calling things. So for you, you call it a scraper, fair enough. Don't go into details. Don't call it convex, concave, etc. if you are not sure. Leave it at a basic level so that everyone knows, okay, this site, this form has got things like scrapers or burins, etc. Okay? There are many other ways of classification. For example, this everybody knows is a hand axe, no doubt about that. But I can also classify it depending on other variables. Okay? So this you don't need to worry about. Same, I can have this scraper, I can go into it in many different concave, convex, etc. I'm not bothered right now. Okay? Now, the next is measurements. How are you going to measure? Why is it important? Is because there are many different technologies now to measure artifacts and to get a good result. In the first place, let's start with this simple flake. So you know what a flake is. It has a ventral face, it has a bulb, it has a striking platform, it has a dorsal face. Okay? Now, through time, flakes have been classified in many ways and measured in different ways. For you, I will ask you, how will you measure this? You got the one here? Yeah. Okay. How am I going to measure this? Or that? Is there any other plate there? Yeah. How are we going to take the basic measurement? What do you say?
It will be length, width and thickness.
Length, width and thickness. How do I orient it?
Sorry?
Your working line has to be a correct.
Okay, what else? So now this is an issue because whatever measurement you are going to take is going to the national database, and then Dr. Joglekar's statistics, he will compare, say, flakes from Andhra with Lower Paleolithic with flakes from Tamil Nadu. He may get results which are completely wrong because your measurements are wrong. Okay? So now if you have a flake and if you are only going to take the longest axis, this is not a measurement which is accepted. Okay? So generally, when we measure flakes or things, we take it as per the technological axis.
Yeah.
The technological axis is defined as where the bulb and striking platform are, and then I take, it was hit in this way, it came out like this. It didn't come out like this. When Achilles was hitting it or the prehistoric Napa was hitting it, it came out like this. Okay, so I would measure length this way, breadth this way, and then thickness. So that's the first thing for you. Okay? As far as flakes. If you want to measure as per longest axis, somewhere in the form you have to write that the measurement was taken as per the morphological axis, not the technological axis. Okay? But if you you are going to measure a hand axe or a cleaver, which are mostly, these are the tools you are going to do. In that case, always the measurement is taken as per the morphological axis. Okay? The longest axis, the length, maximum breadth, not breadth anywhere along the way, maximum breadth, and the point where there is maximum thickness. Okay? These simple things you keep in mind for your measurements. Okay? Is it clear? But nowadays, there are other ways to do measurements. And one way which the NMMA should at some point in time employ is 3D. So you scan this through some 3D software. Nowadays you have a lot of 3D software available even on Android phones or whichever phone you have. You scan this and you can generate all your measurements later. They can have a database in which your scanned models are available with NMMA, and then some others can work on more complicated statistics, more complicated shape analysis, and different ways to be able to deconstruct each artifact. So once you have the 3D with you, you can generate anything you want from that particular model, and that will be a huge asset for the NMMA. This is the second or third phase down the line. Right now, just remember, if you are taking a hand axe or cleaver, always take along the longest axis and make sure that you are taking the maximum length, maximum breadth, maximum thickness. Each tool you can have n number of other measurements. For our own study, we'll probably take some 20-30 measurements from this tool, but that doesn't concern you right now. Right now, the NMMA just wants to know, okay, I got a hand axe, it's lower or middle Paleolithic, or in this case, lower Paleolithic. These are the dimensions, and then that is the weight. That's all that concerns you. Okay? Later on, it is a suggestion which actually was implemented by NMMA right way back in time, as far as I remember, at Deccan College. They were actually doing some 3D scanning of some of the artifacts. Okay? And then you can go on to all these studies, like the statistics, which show you, like Dr. Joklekar showed you, exactly where your tools fall in the general picture of others. You can go into detailed counting of the scars. You have a description column there. If you are experienced, you can say, okay, I have a hand axe, these are the dimensions. It has got 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever scars on dorsal face and so many on ventral face. If you cannot identify dorsal and ventral, don't bother, say phase 1, phase 2 for now. Okay? If you can't do this at all, my suggestion is don't even bother. It's good as identification for NMMA, but if you are not able to do it, don't do it. Just keep it simple. Okay? How to measure, we have shown you. Now, the last is, I will come to this issue, I'll come to the use later. But the other issue is the state. You have an important column whether the tool is, what is the condition of the artifact. What do you think about this one? What would you say? What do you have in the form? You have various criteria on the form. How would you situate this in your NMMA form? Is it complete? Is it broken? What do you think? Complete or broken? Complete? Partially broken. Where? Top. Okay. So in my view, it's not broken. This is a flake which has been detached intentionally. But it's a genuine doubt. Sometimes the tool broke, and then later on someone else came and resharpened, rejuvenated it. So if you can't identify all that, again, don't bother. As far as I am concerned, this is complete. Okay. Now secondly, can you see what is the difference between this and this in terms of, don't worry about the shape, just look at the physical condition. What is the difference? Exactly. It has patination. It has something which is a chemical alteration of the surface of the tool because it was lying in the soil of a particular nature. In this case, it was lying in ferruginous, very rich in iron, soils which are very rich in iron. That has given it this reddish color. And that is a permanent thing. It's not I'll wash it more, it won't come out. It's patina. Okay? this is very diagnostic. If I find this type of tool at say coming out of Isampur museum collections, I'll be very surprised. And I will think definitely kuch gadbad hai. Somebody has mixed up the collections. So that's happened. It's not unusual. I've seen some tools mixed up in Bhimbetka collections from some other side. It's a mistake, it can happen. But your clue is not only the name which is written, and sometimes the name is very clear, sometimes the name in very old collections has gone. In that case, this surface texture of the tool can tell you a lot as to where it comes from. This tool, even without knowing where it's from, I can say it's resting in a soil which has lateritic ferruginous ferricrete component. Where is that found? Macho Peninsula, India, Orissa, Bengal. I will narrow down more. Then I can do more, etc., etc. So that's the second thing. Then I have some patches which are very sharp and some which are abraded. Now in this case, it's very sharp. It's mint fresh. Obviously because it was made last week or last month, whatever. But I'll never get that in archaeology, very rarely. Very, very rarely. I will not get, I will always see some smoothening of these arides, of these flake scar ridges, even though the edge here is sharp, but these are abraded. Because of time, because of the nature of sediment, because of water, whatever may be the case. So I write that down in my description, that although the edges are moderately fresh, I have abraded arides. And then other things, like this differential, this is part of the cortex or part of the differential patination. These are all identification marks which you can put down, and where each tool is definitely distinct. Sometimes even the dorsal and ventral faces or both faces of the tool have their own unique marks, own unique signatures which identify from another. And these are the things which are very helpful for NMMA when you put that down. Okay, so I have a complete tool, but it's moderately abraded, it is definitely patinated, and it has some percentage of differential patina. Some parts are brownish, some parts are reddish. So this is again because of the way it's lying in an iron-rich soil. Okay, so it's lying this way. And this has been impacted far more than this surface before it's buried. So all these small things can help NMMA in, in narrowing down that, okay, you've actually done some work and you have not just cut pasted from somewhere else, as she said. Okay, so that is that. The last is identification of edge damage. Now, in this case, actually, the edge is very, very abraded, so I can't really make out much. But, yeah, in the case of this scraper, obviously the tool has been used. That's why they were made. So the tool has been used either for chopping or cutting or scraping or piercing or boring or some lateral movement, whatever it may be, whatever the case may be. Obviously the tool has been used, and that use leaves some residual marks on the edges. Sometimes you can see, sometimes you cannot see. In this case I can't see because the edges are so old, they are already abraded. I can't really make out with naked eye. Microscope, yes, for sure. Whatever it is, if you see some flakes which have retouch and edge damage, you write that down. Okay? Now the edge damage, I am using the word edge damage instead of use wear, because sometimes the damage is created both by use and by some natural process. For example, water or animal trampling or be rolled somewhere, you can have damage on the edge. These are very interesting things for your NMMA identification. If you can't identify, leave it. But when you are looking at a particular tool, at the first level, I suggest keep it very simple so that they can get as much information as fast as possible. Second level, perhaps experts can go into these tools in some more detail and add these minute factors. In some cases in collections where microwave studies have been already done, then that person who is filling up the form can say, okay, for this artifact, microwave has been done and the results show this, or just give the reference. Okay, so some artifacts artifacts, for example, Allahabad has done a lot of work on microwave, so they can possibly add that in. That this has been already studied, reference, give the reference and be done with it. Lastly, your documentation, your assignment of the accession number, etc. Now we have a very cost-effective method of storing artifacts where within 5 minutes from a main database, we can recover any artifact we want and then do any further studies or show it to someone or catalog it for NMMA, etc. So whichever organization you are working with, the database internal, the NMMA is an external database for the ASI. Your internal storage system and your internal database should be ready. That database should tell you that this particular artifact is located exactly where. In box number so and so, row so and so, shelf so and so, whatever, so that any student or any assistant working on the NMMA project can locate that artifact within as short a time as possible so that no time is wasted and preserve your national heritage in a very safe manner. This is very, very essential. Okay? So there is no damage to the artifact, its recovery is very fast and you can contribute to the classification for your NMMA. So that's what I have to say. I know that stone tools are the most difficult for most people in classifying, especially the typology part, and I do not disagree with that, because even when we are doing research in our lab, we are always fighting about this issue of typology. Now lastly, we are doing stone tools, so I'll just show you one more video and Shutuluka will talk about that. Here. So when we are doing stone artifacts, again the concept of what is an antiquity must be very clearly defined. And we should have some theoretical framework for that. Artifacts which are falling within a certain category are going to be considered. When you are doing Neolithic, Chalcolithic and later periods, Shutuluka, you can talk about this artifact is going to come up a lot. I don't know whether you have.
The issue is, and this from Neolithic, actually Mesolithic onwards, you start getting them a lot. That is your grinding stones, and it continues way into time. And everywhere in most reports it is recorded as other stone tools. So we don't know, or other stone objects, which is also a very ambiguous category. So we never know where they are or what they are. So even if you want to, and just one, I actually looked it up on the NNMA form, and if you write grinding stones, you get a list with photographs. Some of them are not grinding stones. Even from the photographs, it's very clear, and this is because there is no standardization of this, and people really do not know how to measure them. When you type stone objects, they also pop up in the same NNMA website. So there is a quick problem of standardization, and this becomes a very important tool, especially when we are looking at later periods, because they are also categorized as stone vessels, sometimes as basins in some sites, especially historical sites. When they start becoming larger, they are categorized as basins, not. So it's important to also think about stone artifacts in later periods, because they definitely become antiquities, and there is not real standardization there as well. And the measurements is another layer to it, level to it, which is generally not always done. So for us, what is important is not just the length, breadth, thickness here, which is the obvious morphological length, breadth, thickness, but what becomes really important is the concavity we are seeing. So if we can measure the depth, that becomes an important indicator in also identifying the tool. So a certain depth would mean make the great difference between a stone vessel versus a grinding stone. So maybe thinking of those terms as well, and thinking of the working surface.
There. That depth column is already there.
Exactly. And in most cases, this is because yesterday I actually looked into this. So stone objects stone artifacts, tools, just tools, or grinding stones. So maybe thinking about
These can fall in any cultural phase.
Absolutely.
Which is why
Exactly.
I wanted to talk
Yeah.
about the stone artifacts which
Yeah.
actually go into the historical and the Chalcolithic and these periods. Because maybe before this, the anvils do not come under antiquity, but these stone artifacts become antiquity in the historical periods and the Harappan periods and the
Yes.
proto-historic periods. So maybe it's also important to think about those because they are becoming antiquity and we have to fill up
Yes.
the sheets.
And
That's
Dr.
why we-
Madhurika raised a very important point yesterday that what is an today what is an antiquity here in Tamil Nadu may not be something or may not be an antiquity somewhere else. So this regional variability in what you classify as antiquities, there are no strict rules. This ambiguity is there and we cannot wish it away. So that's also really, really important. So this is what we have to say. One is regarding looking at the artifact, looking at the context and provenance, looking at the raw material, understanding the technology by which it was made so that you can classify it correctly, assigning a name to it which is difficult but has to be done, and taking the appropriate way of describing it and appropriate way of taking measurements which will influence everything else later on. So once you have these basic simple things put into the database, then afterwards the database can add levels and levels can be added to it over the next decade or so. So again I would like to say that this NMMA is essential for this country, and workshops like this I think are brilliant because we can get together and peacefully over 3 days talk about our ideas and discuss what are the problems we are facing. I have done a lot of cataloging of NMMA forms, many forms I have done. And I have struggled with it, just like all of you. It's not that I know exactly this is good, that type. We have had lot of discussions before we put down the final type. And that is valid because that's a theoretical issue. What we are calling what. And in fact, there are many calls in recent years for a conference on typology and terminologies we use in India. That can also be part of NMMA because these are genuine issues. And the further back in time we go, the more complex this becomes. So if you have a doubt about filling the form, don't think you are in isolation. All of us are in the same boat. Okay? And all of us are meant to help each other. So in this. So that's the main thing. That's why these gatherings are there. So that we can talk, we can discuss and then come out with some solutions to take this database forward. So now you are very hungry, I am sure. We'll all go for lunch. Thank you again for inviting us.